everybody, and welcome back to another video from Northeast Christian Apologetics. My name is Simon Williams, and today we are going to be continuing our reading of Christian Apologetics by Douglas Groothuis. Remember that this is a great book to have in your library, and I highly recommend that you get it. You can get this book at Amazon.com as well as ChristianBooks.com. Remember that this is kind of like a React video, a book study. I'm going to be reading through the book and discussing the content when I see fit. In this chapter, we're going to be going through chapter 9, which is original monotheism. And in this chapter, Dr. Groothuis doesn't so much as present an argument as provide information. If you are in my local classes here in Connecticut, then this chapter does not correspond to any of the lessons in that video series. This is a new addition to this second edition book, and so if you like to, you can go ahead and skip this video. I'm still going to read through it, even though it's a very short chapter, because I think that the information in it is useful and interesting. But yeah, in this chapter, Dr. Groothuis is basically going to be saying that there's good reasons, or some people have found that there are good reasons to believe that the core of religious beliefs, or at least as far as humans go, originally people generally have like a monotheistic view of reality, and then it devolves into polytheism or various other kinds of religions. That usually cultures and dominantly cultures have historically held to a kind of monotheism and then devolve into something else. And this corresponds well with how the Bible presents God's relationship to humanity, in which God is the only God from the beginning, and that he creates humanity, and then humans are aware that God is the only God, but via different reasons they reject God and in search of other powers, whether it be angels or demons or things of that nature. So this kind of view, this original monotheism, kind of sits well with the typical Christian view. And some people might want to argue that if God had presented himself in the way that the Genesis account seems to indicate, where God is powerfully involved with the lives of humans, and that everyone had a monotheistic belief, then that would be the kind of belief that would maintain throughout human history, is a monotheistic kind of belief. But that's not necessarily true. Even the atheist J.L. Schellenberg, in his book Divine Hiddenness and Human Reason, he argues that even if a strong epistemic situation were to obtain in the actual world, which I think it does, but he's saying he doesn't think that it does, but he's saying that even if it did, then religious diversity in the sense in question in his book that he's talking about, and he means not just in a sense of diversity of denomination like you see in Protestant Christians, where it's there's a lot of different denominations, a lot of different views, but it's still obvious that all of them are Christian. He's saying that the religious diversity in the form of completely different religions that are not compatible on any level would not be ruled out. Quite the contrary. If the object of the experiences in question were indeed the inexhaustibly rich source of existence, he's talking about God here, we would expect traditions that arose on the basis of such experiences to potentially reflect this richness. Okay? And if there is a strong epistemic situation in relation to theism, there would be nothing preventing individuals from having experiences apparently of God of other sorts. Okay, so you can have different experiences and then interpret those experiences in different ways, and thus giving rise to different religions. One of the things that he takes into consideration in this book is that humans have freedom of the will. So J.L. Schellenberg says, and I quote, "If humans would remain free to reject God, as I have argued they would, there would presumably remain the possibility of religious beliefs and practices incompatible at all levels with traditions built up on the experience of God, resulting directly or indirectly from the rejection of that experience by some individuals at some point in time." Okay, so even if God's existence is obvious to us or clear, and our original monotheism is true, then we would still expect to see religious diversity, according to the atheist Schellenberg. So let's keep this in mind, and this is actually what we do see. I think that's what we see, so a lot of good information to discover and to learn about in all of this, and I highly recommend that you take a look. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the chapter. Groothuis begins by saying, before articulating several compelling arguments from natural theology based primarily on philosophy and science, we will adumbrate a historical argument for monotheism, although it is not often today considered as part of apologetics or is neglected. It is an argument for original monotheism, which trades on the interpretation of ancient scriptures and ancient anthropological evidence. The case in a nutshell is that the best evidence makes credible the claim that the original religion of humanity was a form of monotheism. This is not to claim that all extant religions are monotheistic at their core. However, they are not. Original monotheism holds that other forms of religion are devolutions from monotheism, not primitive antecedents to monotheism. Winfried Corduan describes the first form of religion from the first chapter of Genesis. 1. There is one God who has a personhood as opposed to being an impersonal force. 2. God is referred to with a masculine grammar and has masculine qualities. 3. God apparently lives in the sky, heaven. 4. God has great knowledge and power. 5. God created the world. 6. God is the author of standards of good and evil. 7. Human beings are God's creatures and are expected to abide by God's standards. 8. Human beings have become alienated from God by disobeying God's standards. 9. God has provided a method of overcoming the alienation. Before exploring the argument for original monotheism, let us quickly consider a biblical outlook on the matter. If God revealed himself at the fountainhead of humanity, then the knowledge would likely be passed down from generation to generation and would be inscribed in the history of religion and culture, even outside of the Bible. The knowledge of God would also be available by the direct experience of nature, called general revelation. As Carl Henry puts it, evangelical religion discusses man's primal experience only in the context of a universal revelation of God, which directly engages man as a carrier of the created image of God in both mind and conscience, and confronts him intelligibly in external nature and history. According to Scripture, God created the universe and placed a man and a woman in a garden to develop and care for the creation. Yet God's image bearers were seduced to rebel against their Creator and suffered the consequences. False religion then proceeds from the disordered personality of human beings wrought by the fall. Polytheism, dualism, henotheism, pantheism, deism, and bogus monotheism are versions of religious systems birthed and nurtured by humanity's fallen proclivities. Paul explains this pattern of creation, fall, and false religion in Romans 1. Even though God has disclosed himself to humanity in nature and conscience, humans have suppressed this truth and have turned to idols and all manner of false religion. The narrative applies to 1, the history of religion, 2, humanity's fallen proclivity toward idolatry, and 3, each person's sinful natural tendencies. Given the biblical evidence, we would likely expect to find a memory of monotheism in the earliest strata of anthropological evidence. We would not expect to find that monotheism appeared late in the record as the result of a long process of evolution. Although religious historian Mircea Eliade did not hold to original monotheism, he noted a pattern in primitive religion that fits Paul's account and indictment. The history of supreme beings whose structure is celestial is of the utmost importance for an understanding of the religious history of humanity as a whole. Celestially structured supreme beings tend to disappear from the practice of religion from cult. They depart from among men, withdraw to the sky, and become remote, inactive gods. In short, it may be said of these gods that after creating the cosmos, life, and man, they feel a sort of fatigue, as if the immense enterprise of the creation had exhausted their resources. So they withdraw to the sky, leaving a sun or a demiurge on earth to finish or perfect the creation. Gradually, their place is taken by other divine figures, the mythical ancestors, the mother goddesses, the fecundating gods, and the like. Eliade refers to supreme sky gods, whose transcendence is indicated by their elevation. This is not full-orbed monotheism, but it may be a remembrance of it. To telegraph our argument, Winfried Corduan notes that virtually every religious culture carries a vestige of monotheism that can be identified as a variation of the 9-point description given above. Of course, there is a difference between one, there being strong textual and anthropological evidence for original monotheism, and two, original monotheism being the true religion. For various reasons, the evidence for original monotheism might be weak and monotheism still be true. Perhaps the requisite evidence has been lost, or even if there is strong anthropological evidence for original monotheism, there might be other reasons for rejecting monotheism as a worldview. Nevertheless, a good case for original monotheism strengthens a general and cumulative case for Christianity. The perspective that is nearly universal in social science is that religion is a merely humanly constructed phenomenon, which moves through stages of cultural evolution. From a secular view, all religion is based on merely human responses to nature itself. Rodney Stark makes this clear when he speaks of the naturist, or nature-only account of religion. The fundamental premise of naturism is that humans gain a sense of the divine from natural phenomenon: sun, moon, stars, mountains, rivers, thunder, and lightning, storms, the seasons, animals, and plants. Faced with such an inspiring, mysterious, frightening, and awesome natural world, humans endowed nature with supernatural qualities. Not content to leave it at that, the naturists transformed the study of religion into a study of language, to discovering the basis for the evolution of religions in the personification of natural objects and subsequent confusions as to sacred names. The naturist claims that the further back we go historically, the more irrational these responses and beliefs are. Such judgments, however, seem to be based more on naturalistic evolutionary assumptions than on the available evidence. Darwin's account of biological evolution has influenced more than biology, and it is inadequate there, as I argue later in this book. However, the evolutionary claim that religion proceeds in the same pattern of culture in general, from the simple animism or polytheism to the more complex monotheism, does not seem to fit the historical record, despite some early efforts to make that case. The quest for finding universal laws of development, aping Darwinism, eventually gave way to more detailed study of the data based on fieldwork. Given Darwinian assumptions, it was once commonly believed that humanity's religious consciousness moved from animism to monotheism in historical sequence. The original religions personified forces of nature and made them into gods or spirits. Only later did the religions develop a more lofty view of one transcendent creator God. Ironically and tellingly, the idea of one God, monotheism, is simpler than any form of polytheism. A simple belief in a creator God may be precisely such a religion with minimal development. As Corduan notes, as such, it makes a better candidate to be original than a more complex view. Because the arguments and counter-arguments on this issue are multifaceted, I will outline a basic case for original monotheism, referring the reader to more detailed accounts. I claim that the case for original animism or polytheism has not won the day and that original monotheism is a credible alternative. I need do no more, since the rest of this book gives a cumulative case for the Christian worldview, which I hope gives sufficient evidence for Christianity even without the positive support for original monotheism. To borrow one of Alvin Plantinga's concepts, I will endeavor to defeat a defeater against Christianity. A defeater is a claim that discredits a proposition or set of propositions. I recommend you highlight this because this comes up a lot, okay? Especially in philosophy and beliefs and justifications and things of that nature. Beliefs can have evidence in support of it or evidence against it. And evidence against it is usually called a defeater. And defeaters can either defeat a belief outright and make it so that you can no longer hold a belief in an intellectually virtuous way, or it can undermine a belief, just make the belief less credible, or you can start to build doubts with regard to this. And street epistemologists and atheists are experts at sowing doubt. Okay, that's their main goal, is to try to sow doubt without providing any alternative viable option. which is just annoying, to be honest with you. Anyway, Groothuis continues. For example, if the problem of evil shows that theism cannot affirm the existence of God and the existence of evil, then it succeeds as a defeater. But Plantinga has tried, I think successfully, to defeat this defeater. The case for original animism or polytheism is less significant as a possible defeater to Christianity, but it still poses a challenge to the rationality of Christian theism, since it offers a purely naturalistic account of the origin of religious belief. Not a few naive students in universities have been introduced to the study of religion through this story, and it is assumed in the opening pages of the best-selling book God, A Human History by Reza Aslan. Religious scholar E. Evan Pritchard admits that it was the intention of many scholars to use a primitive religion as a weapon, which could, they thought, be used with deadly effect against Christianity, since they took it that if a primitive religion could be explained away as an intellectual aberration, as a mirage induced by emotional stress or by its social function, it was implied that the higher religion could be discredited and disposed of in the same way. And I think that this has been pretty effective because many of the people that I interact with definitely go this route where they think that the higher religions are just a better articulated form of religion, that this is just, after pounding out years and years of debate, it's just a natural evolution. The monotheism of Christianity or Islam or things like that is just a natural evolution of naturalistic explanations, or us trying to explain things in a primitive way. And we just can't break away from it. So what we need to do is rise above our primitive evolutionary state and take on a more modern scientific understanding of how reality is constituted and things of that nature. But that's not the case. Okay, what Groothuis is arguing here is that monotheism is the original form of religion, or at least that humanity in general has this ancient belief in one supreme deity. And where does that belief come from? Is that just a mark of evolution? Is that just something that we come up with as humans to explain why there is something rather than nothing? Or is it better explained by God actually interacting with the world, as is described in Genesis? Groothuis continues, this supposed defeater of primitive polytheism can be undercut by a look at the evidence for original monotheism. Original or primitive monotheism. Winfried Corduan has made a strong argument that original monotheism is true by drawing heavily, but critically and carefully, on the work of the German Wilhelm Schmidt, the great anthropologist of religion, as well as other work. I know of no other contemporary writer who has engaged the topic in more depth or with more rigor than Corduan. Schmidt devoted his long career as a linguist and anthropologist to the anthropological study of religion and contributed much to the burgeoning and influential historical European school of ethnology. His work built on that of Andrew Lang, who found evidence for original monotheism. Schmidt founded the academic journal Anthropos in 1906, which became one of the leading journals in ethnology, and there some of his work is still published. His crowning achievement as a 12-volume work, and of course it's in German, Der Ursprung der Gottesidee, 12 volumes, the origin of the idea of God. This is 1912 to 1955. It has never been completely translated into English and likely never will be. Some have dismissed Schmidt's work because he was a Catholic priest and was suspected of apologetic motivations. He was a member of the Society of the Divine Word Missionary Order, a Catholic organization. Of course, his motivations are irrelevant since his arguments are what count. To assume otherwise is to commit the logical fallacy of poisoning the well. Schmidt's conclusions were based on an evaluation of the evidence as he saw it as an anthropologist. He was not writing as a theologian, but even if his Christian assumptions influenced his research, or that he did the research at all, that in itself does not invalidate his arguments. Schmidt refined a method called a culture history that attempted to establish a chronological sequence of prehistoric culture. Through copious research of ancient societies, Schmidt deduced that the earliest form of religion was some version of monotheism. This argument was not so much based on the quantity or widespread nature of data as on a careful method of determining priority of beliefs among key ancient peoples. The two main sources of evidence are early scriptures of religions with roots in the ancient world and the anthropological method. Schmidt employed a sophisticated linguistic and historical evidence to reach his conclusions, and for decades he defended them against numerous criticisms. Nevertheless, since his death, his work has more been ignored than engaged. Although Stark's significant book, The Discovery of God, takes it seriously as part of Stark's case for original monotheism, writing that Schmidt's thesis as brilliantly argued and massively documented. But Stark is something of an outlier. For example, in 7 Theories of Religion by Daniel Pauwels, Schmidt's theory is not discussed. In fact, his name does not appear in the index. The argument for original monotheism involves exposing the inadequacies of the evolutionary approach so often found in textbooks and other sources, as I noted above. Some of these explanations, though often cited, are horribly far-fetched, such as Sigmund Freud's and Emil Durkheim's claims that the original religion was totemism. Freud's armchair theory claimed that the Christian idea of communion comes from an ancient totemic feast involving cannibalism. The practice is rather rooted in the Old Testament practices and understanding of salvation in Jesus' own historical teachings and actions. If we let the evidence speak without an assumed naturalism that automatically discredits original monotheism, we find support for it. As Corduan notes, in almost all traditional contexts in Africa, America, Australia, Asia, or Europe, we find belief in a God located in the sky or on a high mountain, who is referred to in masculine language, who creates the world, gives standards of behavior, and may enforce them. Further, the most ancient traditional cultures, the least developed materially, featured exclusive worship of God and nearly no magic. These cultures include African and Filipino pygmies, Australian Aborigines, and several Native American tribes. But why, then, are not all religions monotheistic if that was their origin? Some of the ancient traditions outside of the Bible give the explanation that God became inaccessible, so they turned to gods, spirits, ancestors, or even themselves. The earlier quote by Eliade made just this point. Cultures turned to ritual and magic to summon the spirits to help them cope with a dangerous world without the demands placed on them by monotheism. This too fits the biblical account that fallen people turned from the recognition and worship of God to idols or false gods. Original monotheism and apologetics. The aim of this chapter has been modest, but not insignificant for Christian apologetics. To turn a phrase from G.K. Chesterton, original monotheism has been rejected or ignored, not so much because it has been tried and found wanting, but because it has been found monotheistic and thus left largely untried because of the naturalistic and evolutionary prejudices held by historians of religion. But once the evidence is allowed to speak, the case for original monotheism is sufficient to undercut the defeater brought by evolutionary accounts of religion that render religion in a merely natural or merely human endeavor. Having cleared this ground, we are ready to pursue much more fine-grained arguments from natural theology, which I claim yield greater metaphysical results for Christian theism. And with that, we've reached the end of the chapter. And you know what that means? That means that we get to celebrate. Woohoo! Woohoo! And if you made it through a chapter, I commend you. Thank you very much for coming out for that one. I know it's a very short one, but we're reading it. We're reading it anyway. I think it had some good information in it. I think it's interesting to note how original monotheism is a viable option. I think that there should be a lot more study in this. I think that I should study this more myself. But we're going to be, next week, we're going to be diving into Chapter 10, the ontological argument. I said in other videos that I really like this one. So I think that this argument is very helpful and useful, and I'm excited to be diving into it with you. But until then, God bless. Thank you for watching.